Thank you, Mikko. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, you are warmly welcome to Finland. I decided to speak in Finnish because we are now in Finland. So, dear international guests, you probably want to hear the interpretation. Ystävät, valta kuuluu kansalle. Näinhän sen ainakin pitäisi mennä. Mä ajattelin tässä tutkimus- ja politiikkapäivien avauspuheenvuorossani keskittyä oikeastaan 3 megatrendiin tai ilmiöön Euroopassa, jotka minua huolestuttavat. Ja uskon, että huolet ovat sellaisia, jotka voi jakaa ainakin hyvin laajasti vasemmistolaisessa, sosiaalidemokraattisessa, poliittisessa kentässä, mutta ehkä yli puolueen rajojen jopa. Minusta nämä Kalevi Sorsa-säätiön politiikkapäivät ovat jokavuotuinen, hyvin arvokas ja hieno tapahtuma, jossa on mahdollisuus puhua ajan ilmiöistä, mutta ehkä sitten myöskin sparrata ja vähän tuulettaa ajatuksia ja sitä kautta myöskin hakea sitten ehkä yhteistä synteesiä ja näkemystä siitä, että minkälaisia politiikkatoimia näiden ilmiöiden ja myöskin ongelmien haasteiden ratkomiseen tarvitaan. Näin tällä hetkellä 3 trendiä Euroopassa, joiden ratkaiseminen on oikeastaan välttämätöntä, jotta Euroopan unionilla on tulevaisuutta. Ensimmäinen ilmiö on sosiaalinen kriisi. Me olemme eläneet viime vuodet keskellä kansainvälistä finanssikriisiä, oikeastaan viime vuodet entistä enemmän keskellä reaalitalouden kriisiä. Jotkut sitä kutsuvat myöskin velkakriisiksi. Mutta oikeastaan viimeisen vuoden aikana me olemme siirtyneet Euroopassa entistä enemmän kohti sosiaalista kriisiä ja voi sanoa, että me olemme jo keskellä sosiaalista kriisiä monessa Euroopan valtiossa. Jos me katsomme nuorisotyöttömyyslukuja tämän hetken Euroopassa, ne ovat järkyttäviä. Kreikassa nuorisotyöttömyys on jo ylittänyt 60%, Espanjassa lähestytään 60%, viimeiset luvut taisi olla 56%, Espanjan nuorisotyöttömyys, Italiassa yli 40%, Ranskassa 25%, lähemmäs 30%, ja me tiedämme, että myöskin Pohjoismaissa, niin Suomessa kuin Ruotsissakin nuorisotyöttömyys on korkea. Suomessa noin 20%, Ruotsissa korkeampi. Ja me tiedämme, että jos me emme kykene ratkaisemaan sosiaalista kriisiä pian, eli luomaan ihmisille kouluttautumismahdollisuuksia, saamaan Eurooppaan uusia työpaikkoja, niin on olemassa aito todellinen uhka sille, että me menetämme kokonaisen sukupolven Euroopassa. Ja tähän sosiaaliseen kriisiin myös mielestäni aito turvallisuuspoliittinen ongelma, koska erityisen paha sosiaalinen kriisi on Etelä-Euroopassa tällä hetkellä. Me kaikki tiedämme, mitä tapahtuu Lampedusassa. Me tiedämme, että edelleenkin Pohjois-Afrikasta katsottuna Etelä-Eurooppa ja Eurooppa näyttää vielä kovin houkuttelevalta paikalta. Eli jos me katsomme Etelä-Euroopan nuorisotyöttömyyslukuja, ne ovat korkeita, mutta valitettavasti myöskin Pohjois-Afrikan puolella monessa maassa nuorisotyöttömyys on korkea. Puhutaan noin 25%, 20-25% vähän maasta riippuen. Mutta mikä huolestuttavinta, näissä maissa keski-ikä väestön keskuudessa on hyvin alhainen. Eli jopa 60% väestöstä voi olla alle 35-vuotiaita. Eli me kaikki tiedämme, mitä tapahtuu tai minkälaiset riskit kytkeytyvät siihen hetkeen ja tilanteeseen, kun nuoret ihmiset menettävät uskonsa tulevaisuuteen. He eivät enää näe toivoa edessänsä. Silloin nuoret saattavat turvautua myöskin sellaisiin konsteihin, jonka seuraukset voivat olla väkivallan kierre tai ylipäänsä yhteiskunnallinen levottomuus ja sitä kautta epävakaus. jään yhtään poissulje sitäkään mahdollisuutta, etteikö tässä tilanteessa tuo Euroopan rauhan projektin luonne, josta Euroopan unioni on alun perin saanut alkunsa, voi edelleenkin tulla uudelleen ja uudelleen yhä ajankohtaiseksi. No toinen ilmiö, jonka näen tämän hetken Euroopassa, joka vaatii ratkaisua, on Euroopan unionin legitimiteetin heikentyminen. Eli Euroopan unionin hyväksyttävyys kansalaisten keskuudessa on heikentynyt. Ja on hyvin mielenkiintoista puhua vasemmistolaisten johtajien tai myöskin valtiovarainministeriöiden keskuudessa siitä, että Etelä-Euroopassa kansalaisten keskuudessa tuki Euroopan unionille on heikentynyt ja ehkä keskeisenä syynä nähdään, että nimenomaan harjoitettu talouspolitiikka, tiukka menokuri, leikkaukset ovat olleet syynä siihen, että ihmiset kääntävät selkänsä Euroopalle. Eurooppa nähdään, Euroopan unionia syyllistetään siitä harjoitetusta politiikasta, jota Etelä-Euroopan valtiot ovat harjoittaneet. Ja sitä kautta ihmiset kääntävät selkänsä Euroopan unionille, kritiikki kasvaa ja myöskin ollaan hyvin turhautuneita. Jos katsotaan sitten täältä pohjoisen Euroopan näkökulmasta, me kaikki suomalaiset tiedämme, että myöskin Suomessa kriittisyys Euroopan unionia kohtaan on lisääntynyt ja myös toisaalta kansalaisten keskuudessa hyväksyttävyys unionia kohtaan on heikentynyt. No mikä on se keskeinen syy siihen? Varmasti syitä on monia, mutta väittäisin, että yksi keskeinen syy, ainakin näin niin kuin poliitikon kokemuksella, kun paljon kierrän kenttää ja ihmisten kanssa Turulla ja Torella juttelen, on tukipaketit. Ensimmäinen kysymys, oikeastaan missä tahansa liikun, viimeksi viime viikolla Lappeenrannassa, Imatralla, sitä edellisellä viikolla Oulussa, on kysymys, että minkä takia sinne Kreikkaan pitää antaa rahaa. Eli voi sanoa, että pohjoisessa Euroopassa EU-kriittisyys tai EUn hyväksyttävyys, kriittisyys on kasvanut ja hyväksyttävyys heikentynyt osittain eurokriisin takia ja harjoitetun talouspolitiikan eli näiden tukipakettien takia. Eli voi sanoa, että Euroopan unioni näyttäytyy tällä hetkellä kansalaiselle niin etelässä kuin pohjoisessa kriisinhoitajana. Ja tavallinen ihminen kysyy, että mitä Euroopan unioni tarjoaa minulle? Miten se vaikuttaa minun työelämääni tai minun sosiaaliturvaani tai minun saamiini hyvinvointipalveluihin? Kun se Euroopan unioni on kriisikokouksia, mustia autoja ja toisaalta myöskin niin kuin eliitin käymää keskustelua kriisinhoidosta. Ja mä väitän, että tämä niin kuin legitimiteetin heikkeneminen on niin kuin todella iso ja vakava kysymys. Ja se edellyttää kyllä meitä päätöksentekijöiltä aidosti ihmisten vaikutusmahdollisuuksien parantamista, eli demokratian edistämistä Euroopan unionissa, jotta ihmiset kokee voivansa vaikuttaa siellä tehtäviin asioihin. Ja tässä Euroopan Siitä on monenlaisia ilmiöitä. Me tiedämme, että veronkierto, veronmaksun välttely ovat ilmiöitä, jotka ovat pesiytyneet kansainvälisellä tasolla. Samaan aikaan me tiedämme, että myöskin kuilu työntekijöiden ja yritysten toimitusjohtajien palkkojen ja palkkioiden välillä on kasvanut viimeisen 20-30 vuoden aikana. Ja tämä ikään kuin eriarvoistumisen kehitys on mielestäni osa tätä moraalista kriisiä, joka on välttämätöntä ratkaista, jos Euroopan unioni halutaan pitää, niin kuin me haluamme pitää sen kasassa. Ja voi sanoa, että ehkä tällä osa-alueella Euroopan unionissa on viime aikoina tapahtunut eniten edistystä. Viimeisen 10 kuukauden aikana Euroopan unionissa on asenneilmapiiri veronkiertoa kohtaan muuttunut totaalisesti. Muistan, kun verokomissaari Semeta oli käymässä vuosi sitten marraskuussa Suomessa ja kävimme hänen kanssaan keskustelua ja mietimme, että mitenköhän voisimme saada tukea komission vuosi sitten joulukuussa julkaistavalle toimintasuunnitelmalle veronkierron torjumiseksi Euroopassa. Koska silloin näytti täysin mahdottomalta, että ECOFIN eli Euroopan valtiovarainministeriöiden neuvosto voisi hyväksyä tuon toimintasuunnitelman vuonna 2013. Mutta tuon meidän tapaamisen jälkeen, jolloin me sovimme, että järjestetään Suomessa 2013 keväällä kansainvälinen veroparatiisi-seminaari, jossa tuota komission toimintasuunnitelmaa esitellään ja käydään keskustelua. Tuon meidän tapaamisen jälkeen noin kuukausi myöhemmin olin Lontoossa viime joulukuussa. Ja mä muistan loppuelämäni sen päivän, kun mä luen The Guardian-lehteä, jossa on sivun maksettu ilmoitus, jossa Starbucks, tiedätte kaikki kahvilaketju, vakuuttaa maksavansa veroja Iso-Britanniaan. Ja mä koin, että nyt on tapahtumassa jotain. Ja muistatte varmasti hyvin, että sekä Iso-Britanniassa, Ranskassa, Saksassa, monessa muussakin maassa lähti iso julkinen keskustelu liikkeelle siitä, kuinka monikansalliset yritykset välttelevät verojen maksuja. Tuli esimerkkejä julkisuuteen ja sitä kautta syntyi kansainvälinen julkinen paine poliitikkoja kohtaan myöskin tehdä konkreettisia toimenpiteitä veronkierron torjumiseksi. Ja tuo komission toimintasuunnitelma, uskotteko, hyväksyttiin yksimielisesti ECOFINissa toukokuussa, joka on mielestäni osoitus tämän ilmapiirin nopeasta muutoksesta. Mutta paljon toimia vielä tarvitaan, jotta tämä moraalinen kriisi ja myöskin eriarvoistumiskehitys pystytään Euroopassa katkaisemaan. Minulla on tällä hetkellä kunnia johtaa Euroopan sosialisti- ja sosiaalidemokraattisia valtiovarainministereitä. Meitä on tällä hetkellä 9. Ja me kokoonnumme joka kerta ennen ECOFIN-neuvostoa ja toimin siinä verkostossa puheenjohtajana. Ja nämä 3 ilmiötä, sosiaalinen kriisi, legitimiteettikriisi ja moraalikriisi, ovat meidän agendalla demarivaltiovarainministereiden keskuudessa hyvin usein. Mutta me tiedämme, että näiden ilmiöiden ja trendien voittaminen, siihen ei riitä se, että pelkästään vasemmistolaiset liikkeet ovat niiden takana, vaan siihen tarvitaan laajemmalti yhteiskunnassa julkista painetta ja keskustelua, jotta myös tahtotila näiden ongelmien voittamiseksi on riittävän vahva. Ja ainakin omalta osalta toivon, että tämä päivä ja meidän ansiokkaat asiantuntijat niin kotimaasta kuin kansainvälisestikin tuo vastauksia, jolla myöskin näitä ongelmia ja kriisejä, jotka edellä kuvasin, pystyttäisiin yhdessä Euroopan tasolla ratkomaan. Oikein mielenkiintoista ja antoisaa keskustelua teille.
Kiitos Jutta. Thank you Jutta for setting us our agenda for the day, and we shall proceed straight to the first session, which deals with the European Union level. And of course, we all know how decisive time this will be this winter and the coming spring for the debates of future of European Union, its legitimacy, the democratic side of it, but also the economic futures. So I hope this session also and this day serves for getting ready for the European election debates and so on. We have named the session Stronger Citizen Democratic European Union, and we have a pleasure to have a distinguished scholar, Professor Bruno Liebhaberg, to give us the keynote speech on the issue. Despite teaching in many universities in past decades, he has also made a career as a civil servant working in different European institutions, including as an advisor in Jacques Delors' cabinet in the European Commission. Among his many duties, he has been very active on the think tank networks, not least with the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, in which he is a vice president and chairs the scientific council of FEPS. He's also chairman of a think tank in Belgium, Gauche Réformiste Européen, and to my understanding, he has also founded the European think tank, but deals with the regulation in Europe, and in this respect has been a frequent visitor also in Helsinki. So, Professor Liebhaberg, please take the floor.
Oops, sorry. I don't know, something happened with the computers over there. Great start. Okay. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you first very much to the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, and in particular to Mikko for having so well organized this event jointly with FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies that I represent here today. It gives me great pleasure to speak to you this morning. And this is so for at least two reasons which are very personal. Firstly, some of you in the room know my previous activities have led me to become a frequent visitor to Helsinki in the period 1990-2010. And I'm so glad to be back here that I would like to share a secret with you, but I hope that we will keep it just between us. As my wife was seeing me commuting so often between Brussels and Helsinki, she started to wonder whether I was having a serious affair somewhere around Pohjois Esplanadi. And I had eventually to take her over to this country, and not only to Helsinki, but also to Porijas and to the Savonlinna Opera Festival, so that eventually she's convinced that I had indeed a very special relationship, but not with one specific lady in Finland, but with many friends in Finnish politics and industry. And my wife logically concluded that in my heart, my second nationality was Finnish. The other reasons why I'm very pleased to be here and to discuss with you the subject of strengthening European citizenship and legitimacy is because it provides me with the opportunity to defend the topicality and urgency of an idea that was turned into a political project by Jacques Delors, a man for whom I had the honor, as Mikko recalled, to work when he was president of the European Commission. Even if Delors relaunched the integration of our continent in the 80s and 90s based on an economic and monetary strategy, he has always been adamant that there could be no Europe without an authentic political society. And that political society certainly needed a parliament and a government, but it could not exist without citizens. Let's, however, be lucid and not fool ourselves. Today, we're still far from being there. If we assess it using a progressive definition based on active participation in a political community, European citizenship is non-existent. The European citizen is out of the office with the phone off the hook. The collapse in the turnouts for the European elections, which has fallen from 62% in 1979 for the first democratically elected parliament, 62% in 79 to 43% in 2009, that collapse is a sad testimony of that reality. Whenever the law allows citizens to stay at home for the European election, they do so. But equally worrying, when they are obliged to elect their representatives in the European Parliament, a large majority of the voters can barely be described as being aware of the stakes. And this is not their responsibility. So this leads me to my first 2 points this morning. Firstly, to think the future of European federalism, including European citizenship, in the classic terms of an American republic, displays at best a serious lack of political imagination, and at worst, a terrible mistake. The US model has certainly succeeded in going beyond the institutional form of the states, but it has clearly failed to bring order to a nation which today finds itself broken down into closed communities and lonesome individuals. In other words, European federalism is not a sufficient condition to cohesive citizenship. And I'm Belgian, a deeply convinced federalist. Secondly, when some intellectuals and politicians believed that by bringing in the European market, they would be able to order the development of an institutional and ideological superstructure, including a feeling of belonging on behalf of European citizens, they were clearly wrong. Perhaps that one day psychotherapists could explain whether such deterministic, purely economic perspective displayed at the time, I should say, by many of us, social democrats who shared such belief, perhaps this will be interpreted as the remnants of our ancestors' orthodox Marxism. But let's come back to the real world. In May 2014, European voters will be summoned or invited to the polls pretty much simultaneously. I wish I would be wrong, but one can legitimately fear that in a number of member states, the populist vote will increase. The Geert Wilders, Marine Le Pen, Nigel Farage, or Timo Soini of this world allege that the European Union is doomed to be a bureaucratic and technocratic monster, and their toxic slogans are now, unfortunately, being relayed and spread across a wider political spectrum. There is a fact, however, and Jutta mentioned it, the European institutions are rightly or wrongly considered to be responsible for the deterioration in quality of life. How could, in those circumstances, the concept of European citizenship be appealing? Let us also acknowledge that the populist vote is an expression of a fundamental challenge to the solidarity principle. Solidarity is at the core of the concept of citizenship. Solidarity is the capability to the others to move closer to the other's position, to engage in dialogue and cooperate with others, to have empathy for others. In other words, to do whatever is necessary to prepare and to preserve the living together in a given community, society, or nation. In Belgium, solidarity between the different linguistic communities is at bay, with a clear challenge to a federal social security system challenged on behalf of the Flemish Nationalist Party. And that party could secure, according to the polls, more than 30% of the Flemish votes at the next general elections of May 2014. And those elections will take place simultaneously to the elections for the European Parliament. In Italy, the principle of the union between the North and the South has been under strain for many years. In France, it's the division of what remains of the fruits of economic growth between those French who are called the whole stock and those who arrived more recently, and that is what is being called into question by the Front National. In Germany and Holland, its solidarity with the country is still referred to by an insulting acronym that is questioned by a population that is still wealthy but is afraid of the future. And to my surprise, even the robust social democracies of the Nordic countries are no longer immune to this dangerous evolution. So therefore, at the end of 2013, we face not only a deficit in European citizenship, but also a crisis in the national political communities. But the time for lamenting has passed. Resignation, my friends, is not an option. It's time to decide on strategies and action. As the Israeli historian Eli Barnavi reminded us recently, while civil war may appear as the natural state of the human condition, active citizenship is the only viable response that we have been able to come up with since antiquity. But it's too bad, however, that throughout history, we've only been able to implement citizenship to a limited extent. So, what could be the outline of an effective strategy to strengthen EU citizenship? I can obviously aim at being comprehensive this morning, but much more modestly, I would like to put forward a limited number of comments and proposals, which in my view could contribute to move things forward in the right direction. First, let me tell you this. I think that the strengthening of a sense of belonging to a European community will not be obtained by mere institutional engineering. And the limited success and even more limited actual impact of the European Citizen Initiative unfortunately validate my statement. You may be aware that to foster citizens' direct participation in the development of EU policies, the Lisbon Treaty has introduced the possibility for at least 1 million EU citizens coming from at least 7 out of the 28 member states to invite the European Commission to propose legislation on matters where the EU has competence to legislate. And such citizens' initiatives have to be backed by a minimum number of signatories in each of those 7 member states. For instance, in Finland, you need 9,750 people signing the initiative, and in a country like Germany, you need 74,250. But while the Commission has to carefully examine each initiative, meet the organizers, and provide a formal response spelling out what action, if any, it will propose in response to it, the Commission is not obliged to propose legislation of a result of an initiative. And up to now, 9 of those initiatives, European Citizens Initiatives, ECIs, 9 have been open, 8 have been closed, 14 refused, 6 withdrawn, but none has had any practical impact so far. So therefore, I do not think that a European citizenship will be greatly enhanced by merely focusing on the institution. I think such enhancement will result in the first place from the success of the European Union itself. Without Europe, there cannot be any European citizen. It is consequently of paramount importance to demonstrate that Europe, as a market-based social economy relying on a common set of values, of humanistic values, can deliver full and decent employment to its people. I cannot agree more with the finance minister. Having a job and a purchase power is an essential element to survival, an essential element to identity, and therefore to citizenship. And this argument requires, of course, that the European project be clarified and that a distinction be drawn between the options put forward by Juan Manuel Barroso, Angela Merkel, or David Cameron, and the options of the progressives. There's no plan B. The construction of Europe is indispensable. But it is essential for us to convince citizens that while plan A can result in unequally successful scenarios, at least one of those scenarios, the one we are proposing, can offer them a secure existence. Now, and this is my next point, enhancing European citizenship requires that we work towards more robust citizenship everywhere in Europe. And I will therefore not just focus on the EU level, but also discuss the nation states and local levels. The crisis of political participation and collective identity at nation-state level is as serious, if not as profound, as at the European level. To deal with it, at least 3 sets of measures should, in my view, be considered. The first thing to do is to nip in the bud the fiscal revolt which has been latent for many years and which the economic crisis is in the process of stirring up. Citizenship is being put to the test at the moment because citizens are questioning the justification of taxes for which they do not feel they are adequately rewarded in terms of getting high-quality public services. And in addition, as the MIT economist Thomas Piketty has recently demonstrated, Europe's societies currently share a structure for the distribution of national wealth which is very similar to the one which was existing in Europe in the 1920s. And history has shown just how explosive such a situation can be. In other words, the current national fiscal structures originated in a post-World War II, difficult to say, post-war, those fiscal structure which originated in the post-1945 environment, easier, that no longer guarantees that there is justice in the way wealth is redistributed. And therefore, strengthening citizenship within the European nations necessarily imply major reforms in taxation. Secondly, even when they are technically efficient, or welfare states no longer offer services that can claim to be universal. They intervene for the good of a few segments of the population, and this evolution saps away their legitimacy, as well as the citizen solidarity. And in a number of member states, we witness how a failure to manage pensions can contribute to the formation of a new generational rift at the heart of our societies. And therefore, modernizing welfare states is another priority for improving citizenship. But, and that's my third point, in a continent where there is so much to do, reforming fiscal policy, Reforming the state and the welfare state is still not enough. Strengthening citizenship also requires that another issue be dealt with, namely migrations, and in particular, management of immigration. I am definitely not in favor of Fortress Europe. I'm not in favor of a lockdown continent. Immigration is a fundamental part of the development of all civilization, and especially of those featuring aging demographical structures, as it is the case in most European countries. Immigration can, however, not be managed using the laissez-faire principle. Let them all in is not an option. Clear and effective management of immigration is not only required from a human rights perspective, from a progressive perspective, but also for macroeconomic reasons and for the future of citizenship. And I suggest putting at least 3 initiatives on the agenda. The first one is to modernize the rules governing asylum rights. This goes beyond speeding up the administrative procedures for examining the documents submitted by the asylum seekers. In the 21st century, political asylum can no longer be the only reason for allowing immigrants into a country. Those immigrants are de facto more and more often economic refugees and/or climate-related refugees. But at the same time, economic asylum cannot be limitless because we do not have the financial means at our disposal. Therefore, how can we concretely reconcile those often conflicting principles? To be permanently accepted on the national territory, should migrants provide, after a certain period, the evidence that they have a job? And what should the community do to provide migrants with the skills which are for them a prerequisite to get those jobs? So these are some of the questions that we have to address candidly and legislate about, with one eye on the Declaration on Human Rights and on our values, our principles, and the other on a realistic assessment of our labor markets, state of play and prospect, of the robustness of our urban policies, and of our budgetary capabilities. And in addition, clearly, I'm very surprised why we have not for so long negotiated treaties with the countries from which immigrants are coming, so that we can hand back to them some of the political responsibility for the well-being of their people. But above all, dear friends, we must bring our laws into line with our practices and our needs. If we want the immigrants of yesterday or today to be full citizens in the future and not clandestine figures stigmatized by the far right and the populists and exploited by shameless entrepreneurs. The second measure which is urgently needed to manage immigration is to enhance the EU capability to act in a coordinated way. I think it is simply not acceptable anymore that while EU agencies exist, as is the case of Frontex, they have ridiculously low resources to act efficiently. How long will frontline countries such as Italy or Malta have to act alone? How many more Africans will have to drown in the Mediterranean before European heads of states and government will decide to take the so crucially needed political and practical measures? My third comment on immigration management refers to integration policies. The exercise of citizenship within democratic societies must be founded upon a common set of values. Today, as globalization has made national communities more multicultural, that foundation has been weakening. And this is demonstrated in the turmoil in Europe's urban communities, as well as in the rise in xenophobia and the return of anti-Semitism, religious fundamentalism, and as already mentioned, populism. Those symptoms of a social crisis call for a more realistic, humanistic approach to integration policy. Integration must not equate to a denial of cultural difference in the host society, especially in this period of rising migration. But we must also avoid multiculturalism, which results in divisions, which results in ghettoization, and instead look to the regulation of cultural diversity. Rather than being tempted by vote-catching patronage, progressives must heed the lessons learned by the experience of countries such as the Netherlands, the UK, or even Sweden, which are now paying dearly for having mistaken do-nothing policy for tolerance. Socialists and social democrats have never entertained the totalitarian fantasy of a society of clones marching in lockstep. Instead, we embrace a vision of society in which diversity is a welcome feature. But diversity must be nurtured by a set of basic values, by sharing common values. Those values should be shared in order for a democratic society to thrive. We have fought for those values, including in particular equality of rights for men and women. And I think, and I would like to be assertive here, enhancing citizenship and consolidating it at all levels imply that those values are fully implemented, and no exception can be justified, and no exception can be even less accepted, because I genuinely believe that our democracies are at stake if we were to give in on those principles. Before concluding, let me just allow one brief remark about citizenship at the local level. The exponential forms of the exponential growth of local forms of participative democracy should be welcome because it is bound to contribute to the restoration and strengthening of citizenship in Europe. But for that process to be effective, there is at least one condition, and that is that participative democracy must bring about true empowerment of citizens rather than just the creation of a rump parliament in the towns and villages. And some positive experience, such as, among many other examples, the admirable policies carried by the PVDA in Amsterdam West demonstrate that it's possible to make that objective a concrete reality. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'd like to conclude my speech with a few remarks regarding the relationship between public authority, citizenship, and democracy. A weak government is a boon to economic liberalism, and social democracy requires a public authority which is strong enough to protect and regulate society. Now, stripped of its prerogatives by the rise of market liberalism, the state is weakened and near powerless sometimes. And I think the time has come for the left to redefine public authority by formulating answers to the following three questions. What is the core function of government in the national economy? To what extent does the original conception of the nation-state remain relevant today, in particular with regard to the concept of national identity that is often dismissed by the democratic left, mistaking patriotism for nationalism? And how should we go about institutionalizing subsidiarity in Europe to ensure effective relations between subnational, national, and supranational authorities? I'm convinced that our ability to find in the months to come answers to these questions is a necessary condition for the citizens to support a political system that will foster a sense of living together in European regions, in European cities, in European suburbs. And the development of a real citizenship is contingent on such support. My friends, against a backdrop of institutional crisis, Social democracy has consistently defended the social rights acquired since 1789. I'm convinced that equally important today is the need to redefine citizenship, and in particular to outline much more explicitly the duties which are included in that fundamental constitutive element of our democracies. Those duties should be applicable to all citizens, whether they are newly arrived or they have been living for generations in the country. Because make no mistake, if a society becomes more than a collection of users of state-run services, it won't remain very long a democracy. A vibrant democracy requires, on the contrary, the active involvement of responsible citizens, fully aware of both their rights and duties, and equally assertive in having the former being respected and in abiding to the latter. And I think that this is applicable at the local and national level, and there's no reason why it should not be so at the EU level as well. Thank you very much.
Bruno, do you take a chair here?
Sure.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking analysis, and just by listening to your analysis and questions put, I'm sure we all agree that they are very relevant here in Helsinki, here in Finland, as well as all around Europe. But before we go forward with the debate, I'd like to ask Dr. Kimmo Elo from University of Turku to give some brief remarks to Bruno's presentation. Kimmo Elo has specialized especially on Germany and German questions and policies, but also, and they are more and more entangled together, German questions and European integration questions. So Kimmo Elo, please, have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for the invitation to this seminar. I actually do agree with you that we have a crisis of citizenship in Europe. There are several reasons for that. The first thing I would like to ask you, what do you think will happen with turnout in next European parliamentary elections? Because this tendency, since the first elections in mid-70s, has been a declining turnout, as you described it. And it actually has strengthened interpretation among scholars that the EP elections are considered more and more to be a second-order elections. And for that, mostly the main reason is in this lack of genuine contest for political leadership in Europe, that the people can elect their MEPs to the European Parliament, but they have no possibilities to influence the further Commission, the President of the Commission, etc., etc. So practically the voters have no possibilities to choose between rival candidates for executive offices at the EU level. Do you see here a reason for this low turnout?
Okay. I don't know if it works. Yeah, okay. Now, I think the issue of the issue of turnout at the European Parliament elections and the relation with the sense that you can influence things. I would just make a few remarks. The first one, I think that the political establishment has got a huge responsibility in that. One of my Dutch friends, René Cuperus, recently wrote in an article that today we see that the political leaders are not on the forefront of the battle for Europe. And that in particular, while we talk about the European Parliament having the legitimacy today, we still send to the European Parliament not those who are the top leaders at the national level, but in a number of countries, I'm sure it's better here in Finland, but in a number of countries, we send to Brussels or Strasbourg those people who are either retired politicians or retired from executive jobs, or people to whom something is due because they've served the party. And obviously, this is not the way to do, because what we need in the European Parliament, if we want to make it a vibrant, powerful organization, which enforces its role in the democratic process and in the construction of the democratic Europe, well, we need to have powerful people. That's number one. Number two, I think it is, however, unfair to say that the European Parliament is not a democratic forum as our local parliaments can be, or national parliaments can be. You have the possibility to lobby your MEP. You have the possibility to be heard at the EU level. So I think that it's unfair to say that the system is not working. The question is, it's the remoteness, the fact that, of course, it's easier to go and meet in the lobby your MP and make your case being heard than it is probably to go to Brussels or Strasbourg. And there perhaps things need to be improved. I know a number of MEPs who make a point of being very much present in their constituency of origin every week, and making sure that they can relay the views of their constituents. So I think the situation is not as negative as some people may want to say.
Okay, thank you very much. You also mentioned is the new the EU Citizens Initiative introduced in the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009 with the idea of fostering democratic influence on the EU's decision making and especially in EU's legislation. Your evaluation was quite tough that the initiative has not been very successful, and the figures you have mentioned, 14 initiatives, 9 open initiatives, 8 closed, 14 refused, and 6 withdrawn, are of course quite dramatic. But I would be a bit more soft with this issue that we have had this new initiative since 2000 and practically 2010, so it is in a very early stage still. So I would give it a bit more hope that it could function, but I agree with you that these, the framework, the prerequisites for initiating a legislation in the EU are quite strict. You need to have 1 million signers for the initiative from at least seven countries, etc., etc. So, but the more general argument in this respect is that I see in this initiative a symptomatic way of the EU for fighting against this democratic deficit, as it's called in the literature, so that they try to strengthen the input democracy, because the EU has been often referred as an output democracy, producing directives, legislation, norms, etc., etc., with minimal or no influence from the citizens. What is mostly left outside in this picture is the black box itself, the EU, decision-making framework, the decision-making apparatus. And I see here a gap between quite well-functioning democracies in the member states on the one hand, and attempts to strengthen the EU-level democracy on the other hand. And they are not connected very well. I see this citizens' initiative as an attempt to connect these two levels, but it is not very well functioning. It leads me to the question that how do you think, should we also open the black box and start to discuss about institutional, structural reforms may be useful for fostering democracy at the EU level and in the institutions like we have in national states, like parliamentarism, etc., etc.
Let me make 3 points in response to what you say. The first one is that I agree with you that indulgence is required in assessing the success of the European Citizens Initiative, because you're right, it's only 3 years old. But I suppose that the reason why I am relatively, how should I say, either pessimistic or at the very least agnostic, is with regard to the efficiency of direct democracy process. That's my point. Are we getting things moving in Finland when we have a referendum? Is that how things move? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We had, let me give you an example. You may have heard that in my country, Belgium, 10 years ago, we had those terrible issues of pedophilia, and that guy was criminal and took 2 girls and killed them, and it was terrible. There were 700,000 people in the street in Brussels for the so-called White March. What impact has it had? Did it have? 0. On the day of the march, people say, this is a revolution which is taking place. And the revolution did not take place. So if it did not take place in a tiny community such as Belgium, 11 million, why would it take place with 500 million? That's not the way we're going to get things moving. So is that a way for not wishing or not acknowledging the need to open the black box? No, it is not. And that's my third point. The need to open the black box is there. But to open the black box, it's not only up to the Brussels establishment to open the black box. It's up to the member states also. Because you know how things have been going on for many years now. Every time there is a European summit, prime ministers come to Brussels, and when things go in their direction, and when they've got good news to tell, they say, the European Council accepted my proposal, and this has been accepted, and this is what it's going to be. And when there is a bad decision, or when austerity measures have to be taken to be concrete, the responsibility is always with Brussels. It's with the Union. It's the Union which has decided. But the Union is not a black box. The Union is, on the one hand, 28 heads of state and government, and on the other hand, 700 or less, I don't even forget the number, members of parliament, of the European Parliament, who decide together. So the question is, first of all, to make more clear where the responsibilities are, what the processes are, but I'm not necessarily sure, for me, it's not clear that allowing direct democratic processes to be developed further will change things. I think that there has to be, of course, we can talk about the need for communication policies to be enhanced. We've been talking, I've been dealing with European affairs since 1979. Since 1979, successive commissions say that they have a new master plan to foster communications on Europe everywhere. And every year, every 5 years, people say, we didn't have the right plan, we need to come up with a new plan. I don't think that is the issue. I think we need to have people to understand how the process is, how the process works, and that the process works with their representatives. The finance minister has been elected a member of parliament. She's the chair of a major party in this country. And that's the same for colleagues everywhere in Europe. So she has the legitimacy. And the question is that when she goes to Brussels, she has that legitimacy, and when she comes back from the ECOFIN, she has lost the legitimacy, because somewhere it has faded in what you call the black box. And that's why I think that we need to explain much more clearly how the process works, because in essence, I do not think that the process is undemocratic.
Okay, thank you. So what is needed, if I sum it up, is more and clear communication from the EU towards the citizens. My final question, comment, before, then I think we can proceed to the public discussion, is about fostering the participation and activities in among the voters and the citizens especially. There has been a lot of talk about European parties, that we should have pan-European parties, even pan-European elections, especially in regard of the EP elections. What do you think? Could a process toward in this direction, that the EP elections would be united elections with similar or the same voting system, election system, and with European parties representing and the national candidates at the European level? Could this, in your opinion, foster the democracy in Europe?
Yes, I do think so. And I do think that having those European parties becoming more and more visible is something which is bound to enhance the understanding about European issues, and also the sense of belonging, of sharing common issues, common problems, and trying to come up together to find solutions. Let me take an example. This meeting today is being organized by the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, very well respected foundation in Finland, and FEPS. FEPS has started, and I don't want to make publicity for FEPS, but I think it's a good example of what can happen when a number of people from everywhere in Europe join forces and try to work together and develop projects together and share issues together, and do it sometimes with variable geometry. You know, the Belgian foundation can do something with the Finnish foundation and the French foundation, or the Austrians with the Germans and the Italians, whatever. But this creates a network. And I think that mutatis mutandis, we can do the same with the European parties. You have a number of people in Europe who are actively involved in the cause of European integration. Those people are not necessarily ready to enlist in national parties, but they would be prepared to do so in European parties. We have in Brussels, at the European socialist parties, we have the so-called militants, the local militants. And there are militants all over the place, and people who feel like being members of the European socialist parties, and they are committed to that. And they're not necessarily prepared to spend time in their local party. And I really believe that that is a trend that should be encouraged, certainly.
Thank you. And I think this is also which shift the focus, which currently very problematic in EP elections in all countries in Europe, that they are not discussing during the election campaigns about European issues, but more national issues, and the elections are understood as a possibility to punish or reward the national government based on national issues, not on European issues. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimmo. If you take a chair here, and we have a little bit time to open for public debate. Just continuing from the last question, I was amazed this week, and like Jutta Urpilainen said, that the socialists had nominated Martin Schulz as a leading candidate. But at the same time, I'm reading from Germany that Angela Merkel might be in favor of Martin Schulz as a leader in a commission. I mean, if there is a need and we want to politicize, so to say, the European Parliament and the Commission, is it a bit perplexed situation that the German Chancellor from the Conservative or Christian Democrats is backing the socialist leading candidate? I think this is kind of watering down the idea of politicizing the election on a European level. I'd like to hear your remarks on that, but maybe we take some questions, that we collect some questions and you answer them together. I see there at least is one, and start there.
That we don't discuss the history and who benefits from this. What is the history of this kind of development? And when in the United States, I have understood that the question that Jutta Urpilainen raised in the morning, that the result of this development is social unrest. And I have understood that in the United States, the government has bought hundreds of thousands of weapons and bullets in order to control the probable unrest that they are expecting. So is European Union going to be quiet of the reasons for the situation and just decide, like so many others, to solve problems with weapons?
And then somebody in the back on this side was asking.
Thank you. Susan George from France. I'll have an opportunity to speak later, so I'll be very brief. I think you went a little bit quickly over the question of referenda, because in 2005 there were two referenda on the Constitution, one in France, one in Holland, with a very big turnout, 70% in France, and an overwhelmingly no vote, 54% in France and 61% in Holland. Immediately, this was not recognized. They wrote the Lisbon Treaty, which is a carbon copy of the constitutional treaty, which had been defeated. And don't take my word for it, everybody said this, from Giscard d'Estaing to Madame Merkel to Karel de Gucht. Everybody said it's exactly the same thing, don't worry, it's the same thing as the Constitution. This was not a right-wing vote. I can vouch for that in France. It was a left, social democrat and left vote, because if you take the case of Neuilly, where Nicolas Sarkozy was mayor, probably the richest suburb in France, 80% yes, 20% no. In a working class suburb of Rouen, exactly the opposite, 80% no, 20% yes. So it was not a right-wing Front National sort of vote. So we were completely ignored. When they got the Lisbon Treaty written, we still don't know who exactly wrote it. The only people allowed to vote were the Irish. They too voted against it and were made to vote again. So I don't think it's quite the comparison to say that the White March about Marc Dutroux was a comparable result. And now they won't allow referenda because they're quite sure that many countries would vote no and that they would not get their way.
And still we have Elizabeth here, wanted to have a question, and then maybe we take answers.
Thank you, Mr. Liebhaberg, for your interesting speech. And I would agree with you, and actually also Mrs. Urpilainen, that the real problem is that EU itself should deliver, and that the economic crisis is very much behind all this lacking legitimacy of the EU. And let me mention 3 examples of what I've been wondering why the EU hasn't done, and actually why the socialist movement hasn't asked for those. The first is the banking regulation. I think very few people find it legitimate that their taxpayers' money is used to save the banks, which is very much what the crisis has been about. And there are good proposals for regulations to how to regulate the banks, but I didn't hear even the mentioning of that on your speech, and it sounds like this was going forward very slowly in making banks really responsible. The second problem is in particular apparent in Spain. Masses of people are thrown out from their homes because they cannot pay the loans for the houses. They are thrown out on the street, and actually many of the apartments are left empty. When the same situation occurred in the US, President Obama managed to prevent the banks from throwing out these people. So masses of people could keep their houses and repay their loans slowly. So I think something similar would be not very difficult to do in Europe. And in particular, I would think the European Union should force Spain to have this kind of regulation, because it's obvious that this is possible. My third question is concerns debt regulation on the whole. When we had in Finland a very strong economic crisis in the early 90s, and many people lost all their savings and accordingly had enormous problems in repaying their loans, we worked out a way of tackling this, giving individuals the possibility to negotiate with their banks a kind of a repayment scheme, even sometimes the repayment were diminished, so that they could have a way of starting again. And this, I think, this arrangement is rather unique in Europe, but it's been looked at with envy from a number of other countries. Why on earth have the socialists not been enforcing, trying to have something like this organized in other European countries? And I think this would be a good thing to do in the European Parliament, but I've never heard any socialist ask for it at all. Thank you.
Long questions, I hope brief answers, so we can have a slight break before the next session. But Bruno, please.
1 hour, okay. No, I hear in the three sets of questions that have been put to me, one red thread, or in very subjective terms, let me put one red thread in what you've been saying, the three of you. And that red thread is the word inequality, and how to deal with inequality. How to deal with inequality in wealth, how to deal with inequality of opportunities, how to deal with inequality in shaping and be subject to the common discipline, which is the law, which we are, which organizes or living together. Clearly, when you say, is Europe going to be quiet? Well, clearly, this is one of the key issues which all, not only the interior ministers, but all people who are responsible have to think about. How long can our youth be accepted to come out from school and not having a job? How long? Jutta mentioned figures. In my home city in Brussels, 33% of the young people under the age of 30, are unemployed. You have now the second generations of people in some regions, people who have, kids who've never seen their parents working. They don't know what is a working life situation. And that creates a number of problems, security-related problems. But I don't even want to talk about the security-related issues, although they're serious, and it's clear that we, center-left social democrats, have to deal with it, and not to leave this with the populists with regard to solutions. But clearly, we have to appreciate that there is a limit to what people individually and collectively can support. So that's why the urgency is there. And that's why also, when I said it's nice to talk about European citizenship, but how can you have a European citizenship when Europe is seen as not working and not providing the basic conditions? Then you have to start explaining what is the responsibility of Europe and what is the responsibility of the nation state and what is our responsibility, because it's too easy. The point about the democracy and the issue about direct democracy and Marc Dutroux and the referendum on the treaty, you are right. We're not talking about the same thing. I'm a Democrat. I think that it's great, and we fought for that, for having the opportunity to talk directly, to say what we have to say, and to express it collectively. What I'm saying, and that was my point, is that you don't rule by direct democracy. That's my view. I don't think that we are going to come up with the concrete measures, the concrete solutions through referenda. Referenda provide us with a feedback of what a majority of the population may think about crucial issues. I think the point was made. The Europe Treaty was not accepted. Now, you say that it's the same. Well, probably it's very close, certainly. It's probably very close. But I don't think the issue is there. The issue is what was the alternative? What is the alternative? Let's discuss what could be the alternative. And I'm not sure that we've seen an alternative. Now, I'm not saying that the only thing and the only message that we can provide to our people to make them dream about Europe is that, as was the case 10 years ago, for the Maastricht Treaty, you know, the new paradigm is 3%. 3% should be the paradigm, 3% of deficit in our public finance. It's clear that you're not going to dream about Europe with a figure of 3%. It's clear that you're not going to dream about Europe with the two-pack or the six-pack. That's fair enough. But clearly, you're not going to build up any kind of solid economic and social system in our countries if we don't come back to sound public finance. That's a reality. And that's a reality we have to pay because of mistakes we've made previously. And that has to be explained as well. But just to limit to that is not enough. You need to provide an horizon, you need to provide a future, you need to provide a vision of where you want to go, what you want to achieve. You know, today, it's clear that when you talk to young people about Europe, I talk to my students about Europe. My students today are not the same as the students I could have 20 years ago, and my friend here knows that. Not 20 years ago, but the students of today.
Thank you.
For them, Europe is a good thing because of Erasmus. Because there they see concretely what Europe is about. It's the opportunity for the students of Turku to go to Université Libre de Bruxelles, or to go to Bocconi, or to go to... That is the reality of Europe. And as long as we don't show that Europe can be very concrete elements which allow us to live a brighter future, I think we still have a long work to do. And my last point, somebody said, you said, what is the difference? Or basically, what is the difference? Because the solutions which are proposed by the center-left, by the Social Democrats, the Socialists, when they are in power, and the Conservatives, and I think that's a good question. That is the issue. Clearly, why are we today, in 2013, late 2013, in a situation with regarding to banking regulation, where bankers, again, everywhere, are fighting and have strong lobbies to prevent the so urgently required splits between investment banking and activities from saving activities. I mean, this is essential. This is the basics. This is the AB of regulation, because there's no reason why a bank can speculate with savers' money, and then at the end, when they fail, to go back to the treasury and ask for the taxpayer to pay. Clearly, this is not acceptable. 7 years from now, and it's still not over. So clearly, what we have to say, and that's what we're trying to do, in particular within those progressive think tanks, is to show that there is another way, that there is another economic credo from the socialists and the social democrats.
I think we proceed into the economic questions more in the next session. Kimmo, any
very shortly,
short concluding remark from your side?
Yeah, Martin Schulze, that was the question. I think this is, on the one hand, it has something to do with the coalition negotiations currently running in Berlin between the conservatives and social democrats. But there is a longer tendency in German European policy. You can see that Merkel is trying to get her people in the key positions in the Commission and in this institutional framework overall. Not maybe in the most top positions, but in the key positions for negotiations and influence. And Merkel has also said that she is willing to increase the powers of the Commission in the future. And I think the supporting the candidateship of Mr. Schulze is logical in the sense that she is trying to ensure that the Germans has the leading position in the Commission, in a stringent Commission in the future. So therefore, I think her support for Mr. Schulze is quite understandable and rational. You mentioned the historical reasons who benefits from the EU, and I think it has very much to do with this long tradition of European integration being run until early 90s as an elite-driven project. So the national elites were behind this project, pushing it forwards, also against the majority of member states or member state citizens. And they have also benefited very much from this situation by building a wholly new level in European administration. But I also think that we have to recall this 70-year period of peace in Europe, which is a very good thing, I think, at least for Europe, that we have not had wars in the core of Europe as we did for centuries. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. Yeah, and there we can see that the EU cannot sort all things out, and we are in need of new solutions for guaranteeing sustainable peace in Europe. But I think in the general picture is that all Europeans have more or less benefited also from this European integration, not only in economic regard, but also in regard of sustainable peace in Europe. Which leads me to the final thing about this crisis and crisis management. And I think this new crisis is wholly different from the previous crisis in Europe, that the framework was more or less built for the circumstances during the Cold War. Mostly security political reasons, economic welfare. And now we have a wholly different kind of fiscal crisis. The framework is not very well equipped for. So what we are currently seeing as a learning process also in this institutional framework, trying to figure out what institutions, methods and mechanisms are needed in order to sort things out. And I think that's the core problem in this communicating the EU currently towards the citizens, is that we also need to find arguments to say that we need to sort this fiscal and financial crisis out in order to have a Europe in the future. I think that's the most important thing that we should do in the future.
We have a separate session also on democracy building, I guess also concerning the Balkan or Eastern European areas. I'm not sure, Kimmo, when you said that Merkel likes to have her people in top positions in Brussels, that Martin Schulz will consider himself Merkel's man in that sense. But one question about democracy and Europe, it has often dealt with a question that there is not a common public sphere that unites European nation states, so to say, and this popular paradox is that European crisis or Euro crisis actually has increased the consciousness of what's happening in other countries. But FEPS is contributing on this attempt to create public sphere, and I would like to mention the magazine Queries, which will be introduced more detailed in the afternoon, but it's somewhere here. It's you can pick up a copy as long as I don't know how many there are here, but please take one if you find one, and in the afternoon we hear more about this. But now, thank you for our speakers, thanks for audience. We have a 10-minute break. If there is coffee left, please use it, and we continue at 10 to 11. Kiitos. You have a fluent Finnish, at least terve. Yeah, I know. That's now.
I didn't know that.